Thank you for joining us, Ambassador John Bolton, former United States Ambassador to the United Nations and former U.S. National Security Advisor. So let's start with the press conference of President Donald Trump yesterday, in which he said that Iran could be taken out in one night, and also said that that night could be or might be Tuesday evening. He also today said that a whole civilization will die tonight. So, to what extent do you think that Mr. President's remarks are realistic, and whether Iran will be bowing down to President Donald Trump's threats or not?
Well, I think this is typical Trump rhetoric, to take the most maximal position that he can, the whole civilization collapsing. I don't know what he's going to do at 8 o'clock tonight, Washington time. I don't think he does either. But I think this is what he sees as a way to try and put more pressure on the authorities in Tehran, whoever they are, since we don't know. So many have been eliminated. I don't think it will work, but it's intended to have a psychological effect on the Iranian regime and put more pressure, in his view, to get them to reach an agreement by the deadline. But I don't think that's going to happen.
Some analysts are arguing that such kind of threats, especially like saying that turning back Iran to the Stone Ages and removing the civilization, etc., will somehow re-legitimize the regime inside the country. And they are concerned that such kind of threats will help the Iranian regime to bring more support within the Iranian communities. Aren't you concerned that such kind of rhetoric might backfire to the American and also to the war in general?
Well, it's certainly possible. There's no need to use rhetoric like that since we're not going to destroy Iranian civilization, no matter what anybody may think. That's just not doable. I do think we must always be concerned that the people of Iran, who are overwhelmingly opposed to the regime, stay overwhelmingly opposed to the regime. It is, I think, so far the case, going back to the 12-day war last year, that people in Iran recognize we are attacking the regime. We're not attacking the people of Iran. We're trying to destabilize the regime, destroy the instruments of state power that threaten their adversaries overseas, the Quds force, and that threaten the people of Iran domestically, the besieged militia. That's what we're after in order to fragment the regime at the top and cause it to begin to come apart so that the people, without risking being massacred again, as they were by the regime in January, can deal with other figures, some in the regime who may come over to their side, and find ways inside Iran to demonstrate that the days of the regime are numbered. Uh, it may be that we're going to have to do more economic damage to Iran because the regime hasn't given up, and that is unfortunate, but may be required. I wish we had done a lot more to help the opponents of the regime before the war started, coordinated more with them, given them more assistance. But that's where we are at the present moment.
In your guest essay in New York Times on April 4th, you set out a roadmap for what you call finishing the job. You wrote that, quote, durable Middle Eastern peace and security can come only after regime change in Tehran. So after President Trump's deadline today to Iran's leadership, do you think regime change is still the only option left for the United States?
Well, I think it's the only option that takes you to a real permanent solution, which is what we want. You know, we can come back every couple of years and do this again. The Israelis call that mowing the lawn, and that reduces the threat in the near term. But as long as the regime survives, the lawn will grow back, and then so 2 years later, you have to come back and mow the lawn again. I think this is not conducive to peace and security in the Middle East. And now, as we can see by the way the regime has closed the Strait of Hormuz, it could have a devastating effect on the global economy. So this is a moment. I don't think the regime has ever been more unpopular inside Iran. To take advantage of its weakness, cause it to fracture at the top. We've already created a premature succession crisis by eliminating the supreme leader. Who knows if the so-called present supreme leader is even alive or is capable of running the country. I think the regime has been badly hurt, but it's not yet defeated.
You mentioned the Strait of Hormuz, and one of the President Trump's key demands seems to be reopening the Strait of Hormuz, even though its closure did not trigger this war. At the same time, the current US approach does not clearly look like a regime change strategy, at least for the minorities in Iran. So, what's the real end goal of the United States and Israel in this war? It's clear somehow for Israel. We understand what Israel wants, but to be honest, the minorities, for example, the Kurds, do not exactly understand whether the Trump administration really want regime change or not.
Well, don't feel badly because I don't think the administration itself knows what it really wants, and that includes regime change. In the posting this morning, talking about an end of civilization in Iran, Trump also says we've achieved total and complete regime change, all capital letters. And the new leaders in Tehran are more moderate and smarter, and maybe they'll make a deal. Well, they're not more moderate. I don't know if they're smarter or not, but they're still infused with the same radical ideology. And as long as they're following that ideology, as long as there are elements of the Revolutionary Guard that are still protecting the revolution, as they see it, of 1979, then the regime has not changed. But I think it is weaker, and I would have said provide more assistance to the different ethnic groups, particularly the Kurds. You may have heard Trump said on Sunday that we had given weapons to Kurds. He didn't specify who, and he said they were supposed to go on to other opponents inside Iran, and it didn't happen. Well, that was the first I had heard of any weapons being delivered, so I thought that was a good step forward. I don't know what the issue is with the weapons. Maybe the Kurds can use them. That's fine with me. But we need to find out what the answer is on that. But even more, we need to get more weapons in for the people. You know, there have been reports years before in different demonstrations that local police units, even units of the besieged militia out in the countryside, from time to time, it said to the local inhabitants, "Here, take our weapons. You know, we wish you well." I think as the central government's authority begins to weaken, that this is an opportunity, especially for the Kurds in northwestern Iran, to see if they can begin to peel off provincial governors and Revolutionary Guard there. I think the Baluchis in southern and southeastern Iran could do the same. I think Azeris. I mean, there are a lot of possibilities here. And I don't think we need to decide the future of Iran before the regime is overturned. I think the mutual effort should be to bring the regime down and worry about what the shape and government of Iran look like after that's done. Because you can argue about those questions all you want today. If the regime remains in power, it was all just an academic exercise.
But you mentioned supporting the Kurds and in general the opposition. First of all, the opposition is very polarized in Iran. We do not have also an armed opposition other than the Kurds and MEK, the Mujahideen Khalq. At the same time, the Kurds have also been a bit traumatized about the US tactical partnerships with the Kurds from 1979 all the way to 2025. In your memoir, The Room Where It Happened, you criticized President Trump's decision to withdraw from Syria in 2018 after a phone call with President Erdogan. So, how to convince the Kurds that what happened in 1975 or in 2017 in Iraq, where the Kurdish leadership were not supporting in their quest for independence, at the same time, or in 2018, in which you were part of the negotiation with the Turkish government, or recently in 2025 in Syria, that such kind of what Kurds say betrayals won't be repeated in Iran this time.
Well, I know there's a history here that isn't, particularly with Trump, that isn't very encouraging. But the fact that he says anyway, he provided some weapons, and there were press reports at the beginning of the war of those kinds of conversations. Trump often says one thing and does another. That's he considers that preserving his options. But it's confusing to many people and with good reason. So I think we've got to try and keep him focused. And I wish that Kurdish leaders in in the Kurdistan region of Iraq would be talking to him and other figures in the administration to say, look, we can help you in Iran, and the Kurds in Iran can help, and we can put pressure on the regime, and that Trump follows through with that. That would be the best thing to do.
But we have an experience with the United States, which really worked in 1991, where there were a no-fly zone against the former dictatorship of the Saddam Hussein
Right. I,
regime.
I was there in the George H.W. Bush administration, and I,
Exactly.
I thought, and I've said for a long time, I think there should be an independent Kurdish state. And I appreciate it's frustrating, but right now I think we've got the Ayatollahs and the Revolutionary Guard on the defensive. And so trying to convince Trump that this is something that will help achieve what he really wants most of all, which is enhancing his own reputation in the history books. This is time to put aside whatever qualms he had about aiding the Kurds before, and provide whatever they feel is necessary to help put more pressure on Tehran.
So one of the very fears the Kurds have is Iran is still a brutal regime and they still have the capabilities to retaliate. So without some sort of air defense, air support for the Kurds, how the Kurds, non-armed state, and also their arms are very small, very weak on the borders, how can they fight the regime? How realistic it
Well,
is?
Well, I think we should provide further support if that's necessary. My understanding is if you look at the northwestern part of Iran, the Revolutionary Guard forces there are isolated. They have apparently followed this mosaic plan, they call it, where authority was delegated from Tehran. I think this is an opportunity to do what the military calls defeat in detail, and pick off these besieged locations and other places where the Iranian government may have forces one by one, maybe encourage some of them just to leave and go back closer toward Tehran, and work with others to weaken the central government's hold and put them under pressure all around the countryside, 360 degrees, because the more pressure you put, the closer you are to the cracking point where the regime collapses from within. This is going to be dangerous. Nobody should be under any illusions, but I don't think we've ever come closer to the point of overthrowing the regime since it took power in 1979.
So one of the big questions and very serious questions that is, going around within the policymakers circles, even within the Kurdish leadership, is what comes next after the regime will change. So you also wrote in your article that who rules Iran after the clerics should be decided later, not now. So, but the Kurds or minorities in general, also democratic voices, feminists, liberals in Iran, are a little bit concerned about the what comes next because of two things. First, the United States intervention in the region, in Afghanistan and Iraq, they were not successful. Secondly, in the US and especially within the Israeli circles, the name of Reza Shah Pahlavi is coming out. So people are very concerned about these two questions. So how to address these two very serious questions?
Well, I think in fact in Afghanistan we did succeed. The mistake we made was in leaving. And that's what allowed the Taliban to come back into power. I think if we had stayed, a lot of things would have been different. And in Iraq, I think our mistake was not overthrowing Saddam Hussein. I still think that was the right thing to do. I think our mistake was setting up the Coalition Provisional Authority and trying to become a political player inside Iraq. I think it would have been better to say to the Iraqis, you figure out how to do it. We'll protect you from the outside, but we're not going to make decisions for you. You need to make them for yourselves. And I think with those lessons in mind, I think we can help in forming a new structure after the Ayatollah's fall, but we're not going to be part of it. And as for the son of the Shah, look, I think he has supporters inside Iran, but it's not clear to me that he would be anywhere close to having majority support. Many people remember his father and the Savak and the history there. So I think that it's a mistake to anoint anybody the leader before the Ayatollahs are overthrown, and I think it's particularly a mistake to say it's somebody outside Iran, somebody who hasn't been there and experienced what the people have been. At some point, hopefully, there'll be some kind of elections, and as we say, may the best man win, whoever that turns out to be. But we're not going to hold that election, or we shouldn't beforehand, or designate anybody as kind of special. And in terms of the relations of the different ethnic groups with the central government, I think that remains to be worked out too. There's no point in trying to draw lines on a map now when the Ayatollahs are still functionally in control. But I think once they're gone, everything's on the table.
So as far as I remember, during the before days before the Iraqi invasion in 2003, so the United States was actively engaging with the Iraqi opposition abroad. So they were able to bring them together and then somehow envisage, somehow imagine a post-Saddam Hussein regime in which later that sort of agreements between the opposition found the new Iraq. But what I see, there are no active US engagement in bringing this polarized, divided opposition abroad together. So, what are the signs that we could see that US is really serious about bringing opposition together and have a post-regime change plan?
Well, I think we should be doing a lot more. I think all of this should have started well before the attacks at the beginning of March. And I think it makes it that much harder to accomplish regime change, but it doesn't rule it out. And as I say, this is a moment and an opportunity that has come together for a lot of different reasons. But the real issue is, can we seize the opportunity, take advantage of the weakness of the regime, and make it collapse? Hopefully, while we're still in a position that there could be some U.S. influence in what comes after it. I think, for example, one scenario is that the elements of the regular military, not the Revolutionary Guard, but the conventional army, can form a government to restore order and hopefully give space for all the people inside Iran to debate what comes next. That may not be perfect, but in the absence of an external government or an internal opposition that's prepared to assume the government immediately, that may be an intermediate step that we have to go through.
Ambassador Bolton, I know you don't have enough time, but I will have although I have several other questions, but I will have my last question. So, if the regime survives this war, do you think it will come out weaker and more vulnerable, or stronger and more repressive, especially, and how the US Middle Eastern policy will be shaped in terms of with relation to the Iran and also with relation to the Gulf countries, and at the same time, how U.S. relationship will be with the Kurds if the regime survives.
Well, I think all the focus should be on overthrowing the regime, because if this wounded beast survives in Tehran, it will get much more help from China and Russia, and they will rebuild the nuclear weapons program. They will rebuild their terrorist infrastructure around the Middle East and around the world. And as they've shown, they will enhance their capability of closing the Strait of Hormuz and controlling all of the oil resources of the Arabian Peninsula. In a way, this is like Saddam Hussein invading Kuwait in 1990, because what we feared was that Saddam would take Kuwait's oil, then it would sweep into the eastern province and take Saudi Arabia's oil, and that was not in our interest. And it's not certainly in our interest today to have Iran assume that position. That's why I think you see the Gulf Arab states now pressing Trump to finish the job. That they will be in Saudi Arabia, the UAE, all the GCC countries will be in a very difficult position if this regime stays in power in Tehran. So it's that outcome is just dangerous for everybody, and particularly with Trump as president. If his attention span turns back to Venezuela and Cuba, or who knows what it turns to, and we begin to ignore the Middle East again, it will just be worse for everybody except the Ayatollahs.
Ambassador John Bolton, former United States Ambassador to the United Nations and former US National Security Advisor. Thank you so much for your insights, for your time. I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Glad to be with you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.